Before we begin, I want you to try something simple. Put your hands in your lap and close your eyes because no one is watching and no one is judging. And ask yourself one quiet question. In the past week, have you thought about whether you are emotionally intelligent? Not whether you are kind or productive or successful, but whether you truly understand what happens inside you when things don't go your way, because most people haven't, not out of indifference, but because we were never taught to ask that question in the first place. When we hear the phrase emotional intelligence, we often stop at the word emotional and associate it with intensity, sensitivity, or weakness. And I used to think the same way, believing emotions were unreliable, illogical, and impossible to explain cleanly, so I trusted reason alone, facts, efficiency, outcomes. And if people from my earlier life heard me speak like this now, they would be surprised. Because back then I didn't see emotions as something to understand, only something to ignore, and that belief worked until it didn't. Until 5 years ago when I burned out, not dramatically, but quietly. In the way where your body keeps showing up while your inner world collapses. And I found myself crying without warning in meetings and hallways and restrooms, hiding not because I knew what I was feeling, but because I didn't. And that's when it became clear that emotions can be ignored for years, but eventually they demand attention, which is where Stoicism enters the conversation more gently than most people expect. Because Marcus Aurelius never argued that emotions should disappear, only that we shouldn't be ruled by them, reminding himself that we have power over our minds rather than outside events. And that strength is not suppression but understanding. Emotional intelligence isn't emotional expression. It's the ability to identify, understand, and manage emotions, your own and those of others, through awareness, intelligent application, and regulation. Which is why highly emotional people aren't necessarily emotionally intelligent, because expression without understanding is not intelligence but exposure. And growing up without emotional literacy meant that loneliness sometimes became anger and fear became defensiveness, not because of aggression, but because I lacked language, and when emotions aren't allowed, they don't disappear, they distort. Something Stoicism understood well, because unexamined emotions don't weaken us, they quietly govern us, which is why Marcus wrote Meditations not as philosophy for others, but as emotional discipline for himself. Learning emotional intelligence follows the same structure as learning any skill, first realizing your incompetence, then practicing consciously, and eventually reaching a point where regulation becomes natural. Like driving a car without thinking about every movement, and the first step is acknowledging emotions not as problems but as information. Something neuroscience confirms when we see that people with damaged emotional centers struggle to make rational decisions, because emotion is not the enemy of reason but part of it. And a simple starting point is honesty, answering how you are without pretending or complaining, replacing blame with clarity followed by differentiation. Because many people label everything as stress or anger when emotions are actually precise and functional. And grief, for example, is not weakness but evidence of value. Something society teaches us to suppress simply because it's uncomfortable, not because it's harmful. One practice that changed everything for me was writing, not daily or performative, but when needed, because writing creates distance and allows observation instead of drowning. A process supported by psychological research showing that written emotional expression improves mental and physical health by replacing chaos with clarity, which Stoics would call reflection rather than rumination. Handling emotions doesn't mean eliminating them, and there is no single correct method. Sometimes reflection is enough, sometimes movement, sometimes silence, sometimes conversation, but ownership is the key. Because once you understand your own emotions, you stop being threatened by those of others, you stop absorbing every mood or reacting defensively, and instead you can ask how to support someone or how they support themselves, which is emotional intelligence in action. And when we zoom out, we see the cost of never teaching this skill to children, training them to perform and achieve but rarely to understand themselves. Even though emotional education is foundational rather than complex, requiring language, space, and permission rather than perfection, something Marcus Aurelius understood when he treated character as a civic responsibility. Because a society that never teaches emotional discipline quietly teaches emotional harm. So imagine an emotionally intelligent boss, parent, or society. Conflict wouldn't disappear, but cruelty would decrease, differences wouldn't vanish, But understanding would grow because emotional intelligence doesn't make us soft, it makes us precise, allowing us to feel without being controlled and to connect without losing ourselves, which may be one of the most stoic skills we can develop.